long before our cities rose, before history was written, before the world looked the way it does today, there was another civilization. And when it collapsed, Thoth did not leave stories of glory. He left warnings, warnings meant for a future humanity that would one day stand exactly where we stand now, powerful, advanced, and dangerously unaware of what came before. Thoth wrote of a cycle where knowledge grows faster than wisdom, where civilizations rise believing they are eternal, and fall believing the past has nothing to teach them. These warnings were not meant to be read quickly. They were meant to be remembered, because once the signs appear, collapse does not arrive suddenly. It arrives quietly, and according to Thoth, we have reached that moment again. Listen carefully. This message was left for us. Thoth's words were not carved into monuments to impress kings, nor hidden in libraries that could burn. They were woven into myth, disguised in ritual, and whispered in silence. He knew that humanity forgets too easily, that pride blinds too quickly, and that wisdom must be preserved in ways that survive collapse. He warned that civilizations rise like the sun, brilliant and unstoppable, but they set just as surely. He reminded us that laughter is sacred, boredom is protection, and silence is eternal. He cautioned that when knowledge races ahead of wisdom, collapse is not far behind. The first civilization fell because it forgot these truths. It drowned in its own pride, believing itself invincible, dismissing silence as weakness, and mocking the past as irrelevant. The cosmos responded with floods, fires, and winds, erasing monuments and scattering survivors. Yet Thoth preserved memory, ensuring that fragments of wisdom would endure. Now, as towers of steel rise higher than pyramids, as machines of speed outpace chariots, and as networks of information spread faster than scribes could dream, Thoth's warnings echo louder than ever. We stand at the same precipice, powerful and advanced, yet dangerously unaware. The signs are here. They whisper in imbalance, in pride disguised as progress, in noise drowning silence. Collapse does not arrive suddenly. It arrives quietly, step by step, until the world realizes, too late, that the cycle has repeated. Thoth's message is not a prophecy of doom, but a reminder of choice. Humanity can honor silence, guard humility, and preserve balance, or it can forget and fall again. The decision is ours, but the warning is clear. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching, hopefully not from Atlantis, because we all know how that turned out. Thoth was never meant to be remembered as a figure carved neatly into temple walls, nor as a god reduced to a single symbol of writing and wisdom. Who he truly was stretches far beyond the ink of papyrus or the chisels of stone. He was not simply a deity of scribes, nor a myth invented to explain the stars. Thoth was memory itself, the living embodiment of silence, balance, and the eternal rhythm of civilizations. He was the one who laughed at pride, who reminded mortals that boredom was sacred, and who whispered that silence carries truths deeper than words. To call him a god of writing is to miss the point entirely. Writing was only one of his tools. His true role was as guardian of wisdom, ensuring that knowledge did not outpace humility. Thoth walked between worlds, not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. He did not command armies or demand worship. Instead, he preserved fragments of cosmic law in symbols, myths, and rituals. He encoded truths in allegory so that only seekers with patience could rediscover them. He was not interested in glory, but in endurance. He knew that civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom must survive collapse. Who Thoth truly was can be seen in the way he chose silence over spectacle. He did not leave monuments to himself, nor boast of his power. He left warnings, disguised so carefully that they could survive floods, fires, and forgetfulness. He was the eternal scribe, not because he wrote everything down, but because he remembered what humanity forgot. To understand Thoth is to understand that wisdom is not about knowing everything, but about knowing what must be preserved. He was the balance between knowledge and humility, the laughter that shields against arrogance, and the silence that guards against noise. He was not simply a god of Egypt, but the eternal witness of civilizations, reminding humanity that pride destroys and silence endures. And so, who Thoth truly was is not a figure of myth, but a reminder. He is the guardian of memory, the keeper of silence, and the eternal scribe who whispers across ages. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, but wisdom waits patiently for those who listen. Long before scribes pressed reeds into clay, before hieroglyphs danced across temple walls, and before scrolls filled libraries, there was knowledge, vast, subtle, and alive. It did not exist in books or monuments, but in silence, in rhythm, in the way humanity aligned itself with the cosmos. This was knowledge before history began, a wisdom so ancient that even memory struggles to hold it. The first civilization understood truths that modern minds still chase. They knew that sound was not merely vibration, but medicine. They used resonance to heal, to balance, to align the body with the earth's pulse. They knew that architecture was not simply construction, but geometry woven into cosmic law. Temples were tuned like instruments, corridors aligned with solstices, chambers designed to echo the harmony of the stars. This knowledge was not written down because it did not need to be. It was lived. It was preserved in rituals, disguised in myths, and whispered in silence. Farmers planted not by calendars, but by the rhythm of the heavens. Healers worked not with tools, but with tones. Priests did not command, but reminded humanity of its place within the eternal cycle. The Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, remembered this world. He knew that wisdom existed before writing, that silence carried truths deeper than words, and that boredom was sacred because it shielded against pride. He preserved fragments of this knowledge, encoding them in symbols that could survive collapse. Spirals, circles, and stars became carriers of memory, waiting for seekers to rediscover their meaning. Modern civilization often believes that history begins with writing, but Thoth laughed at this notion. Writing is only noise if wisdom is forgotten. True knowledge existed long before ink and stone. It was the rhythm of silence, the laughter of humility, and the balance of cosmic harmony. And so, knowledge before history began was not primitive, but profound. It was wisdom lived in silence, preserved in myth, and disguised in ritual. Thoth ensured that even when history began too late, fragments of this ancient truth would endure, whispering across ages, waiting for humanity to listen. Long before the Nile carried barges of stone, before pharaohs wore crowns of gold, and before scribes etched hieroglyphs into temple walls, there was another world, a world that thrived in silence, balanced in rhythm, and laughed at pride. This was the world before Egypt, A civilization so ancient that its memory lingers only in fragments, disguised as myth and scattered across cultures. Its people did not build monuments for vanity, but for harmony. Temples rose in alignment with stars, corridors echoed with sound, and chambers resonated like instruments tuned to the cosmos. Their architecture was not simply stone stacked upon stone, but geometry woven into law. They believed that buildings could sing, that silence could teach, and that laughter could protect against arrogance. The world before Egypt was not primitive. It was vibrant, humorous, and wise. Farmers planted by the rhythm of the heavens. Healers worked with tones instead of tools. And priests reminded humanity of its place within the eternal cycle. Knowledge was not written down, but lived. Rituals preserved memory. Myths disguised truths, and silence carried wisdom across generations. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, remembered this world. He knew that its greatness was hidden, erased by floods and fires, buried beneath sands and oceans. He preserved fragments of its wisdom, encoding them in symbols that could survive collapse. Spirals, circles, and stars became carriers of memory, waiting for seekers to rediscover their meaning. Egypt inherited these fragments. Its pyramids carried echoes of older sciences, its rituals disguised cosmic truths, and its myths whispered warnings from a forgotten age. Yet Egypt was not the origin, but the continuation of a tradition far older. The world before Egypt was the first rise of civilization, a golden age erased by pride and preserved only in silence. And so, the world before Egypt remains a mystery. Its monuments defy timelines, its wisdom lingers in myth, and its silence whispers across ages. Thoth ensured that even when history began too late, the memory of this world would endure, reminding humanity that civilizations rise and fall, but truth waits patiently in silence. Long before the names of kings were carved into stone, before dynasties claimed divine right, and before scribes filled libraries with scrolls, there was the first rise of civilization. It was not a world of armies and empires, but of balance and silence. Its greatness was measured not in conquest, but in harmony with the cosmos. The people of this age built monuments that defied timelines, temples aligned with solstices, corridors resonated with sound, and chambers echoed like instruments tuned to the stars. Their architecture was not vanity, but science disguised as art. They believed that buildings could sing, that silence could teach, and that laughter could protect against arrogance. Daily life was guided by rhythms, too subtle for modern minds to grasp. Farmers planted by the pulse of the heavens, healers worked with tones instead of tools, and priests reminded humanity of its place within the eternal cycle. Knowledge was not written down, but lived. Rituals preserved memory, myths disguised truths, and silence carried wisdom across generations. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, remembered this golden age. He knew that wisdom existed before writing, that silence carried truths deeper than words, and that boredom was sacred because it shielded against pride. He preserved fragments of this knowledge, encoding them in symbols that could survive collapse. Spirals, circles, and stars became carriers of memory, waiting for seekers to rediscover their meaning. The first rise of civilization was not primitive, but profound. It was a world where wisdom guided progress, where silence preserved balance, and where laughter was celebrated as sacred. It was a golden age erased not by enemies, but by pride. For when humanity forgot humility, collapse followed. And so, the first rise of civilization remains a whisper across ages. Its monuments defy timelines, its wisdom lingers in myth, and its silence waits patiently. Thoth ensured that even when history began too late, the memory of this world would endure, reminding humanity that civilizations rise and fall, but truth is eternal. The first civilization thrived not because of armies or wealth, but because of wisdom. Knowledge was their greatest treasure, and silence was its guardian. They understood the rhythms of the cosmos, the healing power of sound, and the geometry that aligned temples with stars. For a time, this knowledge was used to preserve balance, to guide humanity gently along the eternal cycle. But knowledge, like fire, is both light and danger. When pride crept in, wisdom was twisted. What was once used to heal became a tool to dominate. Sound, once medicine, was turned into control. Architecture, once aligned with cosmic harmony, was built for vanity. Rituals, once sacred, became spectacles to impress rather than to preserve. The silence that carried wisdom was drowned by noise. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched as humanity began to believe it was invincible. They mistook knowledge for power, forgetting that wisdom must guide it. They laughed not at pride, but at humility. They dismissed boredom as weakness, forgetting it was a shield against arrogance. They silenced silence itself, replacing it with noise that echoed across temples and cities. When knowledge became dangerous, collapse was inevitable. The cosmos responded, not with anger, but with rhythm. Floods rose, fires consumed, winds tore, and the earth itself shook. The first civilization fell, not because of enemies, but because of imbalance. Knowledge had outpaced wisdom, and pride had blinded humanity. Thoth preserved the memory of this fall, encoding it in myth, ritual, and symbol. He knew that civilizations would rise again, that knowledge would multiply, and that pride would return. His warnings were clear. Knowledge without wisdom is noise. Progress without balance is vanity, and pride destroys civilizations. And so, when knowledge became dangerous, the first civilization collapsed. Its monuments were buried, its rituals forgotten, and its wisdom disguised. Yet fragments endured, waiting for seekers to rediscover them. Thoth ensured that even when history began too late, the lesson would remain. Knowledge must serve harmony, or it will destroy itself. The first civilization did not fall because of enemies at its gates, nor because of famine or plague. It fell because of a mistake so subtle that its people did not recognize it until it was too late. They believed that knowledge alone could sustain them, forgetting that wisdom must guide it. They mistook progress for permanence, pride for strength, and noise for truth. The mistake was not a single act, but a pattern. Temples that once aligned with stars were built for vanity. Rituals that once preserved balance became spectacles to impress crowds. Sound, once used for healing, was twisted into control. Silence, once honored as sacred, was dismissed as weakness. The people laughed at humility, mocked boredom, and celebrated pride. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched as this mistake grew. He knew that civilizations rise when wisdom guides progress, but collapse when pride blinds. He saw knowledge racing ahead of humility, progress outpacing balance, and pride drowning silence. He understood that the cosmos responds not with anger, but with rhythm. Collapse is not punishment, but consequence. The mistake that ended an age was humanity's belief that it was eternal. They dismissed the past as irrelevant, ignored warnings disguised in myth, and silenced the silence that carried wisdom. They believed themselves invincible, yet the cosmos reminded them otherwise. Floods rose, fires consumed, winds tore, and the earth itself shook. The first civilization collapsed, not because of enemies, but because of imbalance. Thoth preserved the memory of this mistake, encoding it in symbols, myths, and rituals. He knew that civilizations would rise again, that knowledge would multiply, and that pride would return. His warnings were clear. Progress without balance is vanity. Knowledge without wisdom is noise, and pride destroys civilizations. And so, the mistake that ended an age remains a whisper across time. It reminds humanity that civilizations do not fall suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until pride blinds and silence is lost. Thoth ensured that even when history began too late, the lesson would endure. Humility sustains, silence preserves, and wisdom must guide knowledge. When the first civilization collapsed, Thoth did not scatter its wisdom like seeds in the wind. He knew that knowledge, once twisted by pride, had become dangerous. To leave it openly would invite misuse, and to erase it entirely would condemn humanity to ignorance. So he chose a middle path, to hide the truth, not destroy it. Thoth understood that silence is the most faithful guardian. Words can be twisted, monuments can be broken, and scrolls can burn, but silence endures. He cloaked wisdom in allegory, disguised cosmic law in myth, and preserved memory in rituals that seemed ordinary but carried hidden meaning. He ensured that fragments of truth would survive, collapse, waiting for seekers with patience and humility. The decision was not made lightly. Thoth knew that humanity would rise again, that knowledge would multiply, and that pride would return. He foresaw cycles of collapse repeating across ages. To protect wisdom from arrogance, he encoded it in symbols, spirals, circles, stars, carriers of memory that could survive floods, fires, and forgetfulness. The emerald tablets, myths of gods, and rituals of silence were not mere superstition. They were vessels of truth, disguised so carefully that only those who listened deeply could rediscover them. Thoth did not want wisdom to be easy, for what is easy is often misused. He wanted it to be hidden, requiring humility to unlock. By hiding the truth, Thoth preserved balance. He ensured that civilizations could rise again, guided by fragments of wisdom, but warned that pride would always threaten collapse. His decision was not to deny humanity knowledge, but to protect it from itself. And so Thoth's decision to hide the truth became the most enduring act of preservation. It reminds us that wisdom is not lost, only concealed. It waits patiently in silence, disguised in myth, preserved in ritual, and encoded in symbol. Thoth, eternal scribe, ensured that even when history began too late, the essence of truth would endure hidden but never destroyed. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, understood that civilizations do not fall by accident. They fall in rhythm, like the breath of eternity, rising, flourishing, forgetting, and collapsing. This cycle is not punishment, but pattern. It is the way pride erases humility, the way noise drowns silence, and the way knowledge races ahead of wisdom. The first civilization rose in harmony. Its temples aligned with stars, its rituals preserved balance, and its laughter shielded against arrogance. But pride crept in. Knowledge became vanity, rituals became spectacle, and silence was dismissed as weakness. Collapse followed, not suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until the cosmos responded with floods, fires, and winds. Egypt rose from fragments of this memory, inheriting symbols, myths, and rituals disguised as superstition. It flourished, aligned with cosmic rhythms, and preserved fragments of wisdom. Yet even Egypt forgot. Pride grew, balance faded, and collapse returned. The cycle repeated, as it did in Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and countless others. Each civilization believed itself eternal, each dismissed the past, and each fell when pride blinded wisdom. Thoth preserved this pattern, encoding it in myth and symbol. He warned that civilizations always forget, that pride always returns, and that collapse always follows. The cycle is not broken by progress, nor by monuments, nor by armies. It is broken only by humility, by remembering silence, honoring balance, and guarding wisdom. Modern civilization stands within this same rhythm. Towers of steel rise higher than pyramids, machines of speed outpace chariots, and networks of information spread faster than scribes could dream. Yet wisdom has diminished. Knowledge multiplies, but silence is lost. Pride grows, balance fades, and collapse whispers on the horizon. The cycles of collapse remind humanity that history is not noise, but silence, waiting to be heard. Civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom endures. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved this truth, ensuring that even when history begins too late, the rhythm of collapse remains clear. Pride destroys, silence preserves, and humility sustains. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, observed that forgetting is not a flaw of humanity, but its rhythm. Civilizations do not collapse because they lack knowledge. They collapse because they forget wisdom. Pride blinds, noise drowns silence, and progress convinces people that the past has nothing left to teach. The first civilization thrived in balance. Its temples aligned with stars, its rituals preserved harmony, and its laughter shielded against arrogance. Yet, as knowledge multiplied, humility diminished. Pride grew louder, silence was dismissed, and boredom, once sacred, was mocked. They believed themselves eternal, and in that belief they forgot. Egypt rose from fragments of memory, inheriting symbols, myths, and rituals disguised as superstition. For a time, it flourished, guided by echoes of the first world. But even Egypt forgot. Pride crept in, monuments became vanity, and rituals became spectacle. Collapse followed, as it did in Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and countless others. Each civilization believed itself unique. Each dismissed the warnings of the past, and each fell when pride blinded wisdom. Why civilizations always forget is simple. Progress convinces them they are invincible. They celebrate towers of steel, machines of speed, and networks of information, believing these will last forever. They laugh at myths, dismiss rituals, and silence itself. They forget that wisdom is not measured in inventions, but in balance. Thoth preserved this truth in myth and symbol. He warned that forgetting is inevitable, but remembering is possible. Civilizations forget because pride blinds, but they can remember if humility guides. The cycle is not broken by progress, but by silence, by listening to the whispers of memory hidden in myth, ritual, and symbol. And so, civilizations always forget, but wisdom endures. It waits patiently in silence, disguised in myth, preserved in ritual, and encoded in symbol. Thoth, eternal witness, ensured that even when history begins too late, the lesson remains. Pride destroys, silence preserves, and humility sustains. When the waters rose and the first civilization was swallowed by silence, not everything was lost. Monuments crumbled, libraries drowned, and rituals faded, but symbols endured. Symbols are stubborn. They cling to memory even when words vanish. They survive, collapse, because they are simple yet profound, carrying truths across ages disguised as decoration, myth, or superstition. The spiral was one such survivor. It appeared in carvings, pottery, and temples across cultures, long after the flood erased its origin. To the untrained eye, it was only a pattern. To Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, it was a map of cycles, the rise and fall of civilizations, the rhythm of collapse and renewal, the eternal breath of time. The circle endured as well. It was drawn in rituals, carved into monuments, and honored in myth. To many, it symbolized eternity, but to Thoth it was balance. The circle reminded humanity that progress must return to humility, that beginnings and endings are the same, and that silence is eternal. Stars became another vessel of memory. Temples aligned with constellations, myths disguised cosmic truths, and rituals echoed celestial rhythms. The flood erased monuments, but the stars remained, carrying wisdom across ages. They whispered to farmers when to plant, to priests when to pray, and to seekers when to listen. Even animals became symbols. The ibis, sacred to Thoth, carried fragments of wisdom in its form. The serpent, coiled in cycles, reminded humanity of renewal. The lion, fierce yet balanced, symbolized strength guided by humility. These creatures were not worshipped as idols, but honored as carriers of memory. Thoth preserved these symbols deliberately. He knew that words could be twisted, monuments destroyed, and rituals forgotten, but symbols endure. They survive, collapse, because they are simple enough to be remembered, yet profound enough to carry truth. He encoded wisdom in spirals, circles, stars, and creatures, ensuring that even when history began too late, fragments of truth would remain. And so, the symbols that survived the flood are not mere decoration. They are whispers of memory, carriers of wisdom, and guardians of silence. They remind humanity that civilizations rise and fall, but truth endures. Thoth, eternal scribe, ensured that even when monuments crumble, symbols survive, waiting patiently for seekers to rediscover their meaning. Among the fragments of wisdom Thoth preserved, none are more mysterious than the emerald tablets. They are not ordinary writings, nor simple inscriptions. They are whispers carved into eternity, encoded in language so layered that each generation interprets them differently. To the untrained eye, they appear as riddles. To Thoth, they were warnings disguised as guidance, truths hidden in allegory, and cosmic law preserved in silence. The emerald tablets spoke of cycles, the rise and fall of civilizations, the rhythm of collapse and renewal, the eternal breath of time. They reminded humanity that knowledge without wisdom is noise, progress without balance is vanity, and pride destroys civilizations. They explained that silence is not emptiness, but preservation, and that laughter shields against arrogance. They spoke of power, but not the kind kings crave. Power was described as harmony with the cosmos, the ability to align with rhythms too subtle for armies to conquer. Control was warned against, for it twists wisdom into domination. The tablets reminded humanity that true strength lies in humility, not vanity. The language of the emerald tablets was deliberately cryptic. Thoth did not want wisdom to be easy, for what is easy is often misused. He encoded truths in symbols, spirals, circles, stars, carriers of memory that could survive floods, fires, and forgetfulness. He disguised cosmic law in myth, ensuring that only seekers with patience and humility could rediscover it. The tablets explained that civilizations rise when wisdom guides progress, but collapse when pride blinds. They warned that humanity repeats patterns, forgetting silence, mocking boredom, and silencing humility. They reminded us that collapse does not arrive suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until pride consumes balance. Thoth's emerald tablets endure not because they are indestructible, but because they are timeless. They are not merely relics of myth, but vessels of truth. They remind humanity that civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom waits patiently in silence. They whisper across ages, waiting for seekers to listen, reminding us that before civilization falls again, the warnings must be remembered. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, understood that the greatest danger to any civilization was not ignorance, but the misuse of knowledge. Power itself was not evil, but when combined with pride and stripped of humility, it became destructive. Control was the shadow of power, the temptation to bend wisdom into domination rather than balance. The first civilization thrived when knowledge was used to heal, to align with the cosmos, and to preserve harmony. But when pride grew, power was twisted. Sound, once medicine, became a weapon. Architecture, once tuned to the stars, became monuments of vanity. Rituals, once sacred, became spectacles of control. The silence that preserved wisdom was drowned by noise. Thoth warned that power without humility leads to collapse. He reminded humanity that true strength lies not in domination, but in balance. Control may appear to preserve order, but it erases freedom, silences laughter, and blinds wisdom. Civilizations that chase control forget that harmony cannot be forced. It must be lived. The warning about power and control was encoded in myth, disguised in ritual, and preserved in symbol. The emerald tablets whispered that knowledge must serve harmony, not domination. Spirals reminded humanity of cycles, circles of balance, and stars of humility. These symbols carried the warning across ages, waiting for seekers to rediscover their meaning. Yet power is pursued without humility, and control is celebrated as progress. Thoth's warning echoes louder than ever. Civilizations fall not because they lack knowledge, but because they misuse it. And so, the warning about power and control remains timeless. It reminds humanity that progress without balance is vanity, that knowledge without wisdom is noise, and that pride destroys civilizations. Thoth, eternal scribe, ensured that even when history began too late, the lesson would endure. Power must serve harmony, and control must never silence wisdom. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that humanity is a creature of rhythm. Civilizations rise, flourish, forget, and fall, not once, not twice, but endlessly. The pattern repeats, like the turning of the stars, like the breath of eternity. It is not punishment, but inevitability. Pride blinds, silence fades, and wisdom is drowned by noise. The first civilization believed itself eternal. It built temples aligned with stars, honored silence, and laughed at pride. Yet, as knowledge multiplied, humility diminished. Pride grew louder, rituals became spectacle, and wisdom was dismissed as superstition. Collapse followed, quietly, step by step, until floods and fires erased their monuments. Egypt rose from fragments of memory, inheriting symbols, myths, and rituals disguised as superstition. For a time, it flourished, guided by echoes of the first world. But even Egypt forgot. Pride crept in, monuments became vanity, and rituals became performance. Collapse returned, as it did in Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and countless others. Each civilization believed itself unique, each dismissed the warnings of the past, and each fell when pride blinded wisdom. Humanity's repeating pattern is simple. Progress convinces civilizations they are invincible. Towers rise, machines multiply, and knowledge spreads faster than ever. Yet silence is dismissed, humility is mocked, and balance is forgotten. Collapse does not arrive suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until pride consumes wisdom. Thoth preserved this truth in myth and symbol. He warned that civilizations always forget, that pride always returns, and that collapse always follows. The pattern is not broken by progress, nor by monuments, nor by armies. It is broken only by humility, by remembering silence, honoring balance, and guarding wisdom. And so, humanity's repeating pattern remains a whisper across ages. Civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom endures. It waits patiently in silence, disguised in myth, preserved in ritual, and encoded in symbol. Thoth, eternal witness, ensured that even when history begins too late, the lesson would remain. Pride destroys, silence preserves, and humility sustains. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, warned that collapse does not arrive suddenly. It arrives quietly, step by step, hidden in the rhythms of pride and imbalance. The signs are subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but they grow louder until silence itself cannot hide them. In the first civilization, the signs were temples built for vanity instead of harmony. Rituals turned into spectacle instead of preservation, and sound twisted into control instead of healing. Pride grew, humility faded, and silence was mocked. Collapse followed, not because of enemies, but because of imbalance. Today, the signs echo again. Towers of steel rise higher than pyramids, machines of speed outpace chariots, and networks of information spread faster than scribes could dream. Yet wisdom has diminished, knowledge multiplies, but silence is lost. Pride grows louder, humility is dismissed, and balance fades. These are the signs Thoth warned of, the whispers of another fall. The signs are not dramatic, but ordinary. They appear in the way progress is celebrated without humility, in the way rituals are dismissed as superstition, and in the way silence is drowned by noise. They appear in the belief that history has nothing left to teach, that collapse is impossible, and that humanity is eternal. Thoth preserved these warnings in myth and symbol. Spirals remind us of cycles, circles of balance. and stars of humility. The emerald tablets whisper that knowledge without wisdom is noise, progress without balance is vanity, and pride destroys civilizations. These symbols are not decoration, but reminders of signs too easy to ignore. The signs of another fall are here, waiting for humanity to notice. Collapse does not arrive suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until pride consumes wisdom and silence is lost. Thoth, eternal scribe, ensured that even when history begins too late, the lesson would endure. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and the signs are always visible to those who listen. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, did not hide wisdom without reason. He encoded warnings in myth, preserved truths in ritual, and disguised cosmic law in symbols. Yet humanity ignored them. The warnings were not lost, they were dismissed. Pride convinced civilizations that they were eternal, that collapse was impossible, and that silence had nothing left to teach. The first civilization ignored the warning because it believed progress was permanence. Temples rose higher, rituals grew louder, and knowledge multiplied faster than humility. They mistook spectacle for wisdom, control for strength, and noise for truth. The warning was heard, but mocked, drowned beneath pride. Collapse followed, quietly, step by step, until floods and fires erased their monuments. Egypt inherited fragments of the warning. Its pyramids carried echoes of older sciences. Its rituals disguised cosmic truths, and its myths whispered caution. Yet even Egypt ignored the warning. Pride crept in, monuments became vanity, and rituals became performance. Collapse returned, as it did in Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and countless others. Each civilization believed itself unique, each dismissed the past, and each fell when pride blinded wisdom. The warning was ignored because it was disguised in silence. Humanity prefers noise, spectacle, and certainty. Silence feels empty, humility feels weak, and boredom feels useless. Yet these were the guardians of wisdom. By rejecting them, civilizations rejected the very shield against collapse. Thoth preserved the warning deliberately. He knew that civilizations would rise again, that knowledge would multiply, and that pride would return. His warnings were clear. Knowledge without wisdom is noise. Progress without balance is vanity. And pride destroys civilizations. But humanity ignored them, believing itself eternal. And so, the warning was ignored, not because it was hidden, but because pride blinded humanity to its meaning. The lesson remains timeless. Civilizations rise and fall, not because they lack knowledge, but because they dismiss wisdom. Thoth, eternal scribe, ensured that even when history begins too late, the warning endures, waiting for those who will finally listen. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, did not seek to preserve monuments, nor the names of kings, nor the noise of empires. He knew that stone crumbles, scrolls burn, and dynasties vanish. What he wanted preserved was far deeper, the essence of wisdom, the rhythm of silence, and the humility that shields against pride. He wanted humanity to remember that knowledge is not enough. Knowledge multiplies endlessly, but without wisdom it becomes noise. He wanted preserved the truth that silence is sacred, that boredom is a shield, and that laughter protects against arrogance. These were not trivial lessons, but the foundations of balance. Thoth encoded these truths in symbols. Spirals carried the memory of cycles, reminding humanity that civilizations rise and fall. Circles preserved balance, teaching that beginnings and endings are the same. Stars whispered humility, guiding seekers to look upward and remember their place in the cosmos. Animals, too, became carriers of wisdom. The ibis for clarity, the serpent for renewal, the lion for strength, guided by humility. He wanted preserved the understanding that collapse is not punishment, but consequence. Civilizations fall when pride blinds wisdom, when silence is lost, and when progress outpaces humility. His warnings were clear. Knowledge must serve harmony, or it will destroy itself. Thoth did not care for glory or worship. He cared for endurance. He wanted preserved the fragments of truth that could survive floods, fires, and forgetfulness. He wanted humanity to rediscover wisdom, not through monuments or armies, but through silence, humility, and balance. And so, what Thoth wanted preserved was not a civilization, but a memory disguised in myth, preserved in ritual, and encoded in symbol. He ensured that even when history began too late, the essence of wisdom would endure, waiting patiently in silence, reminding humanity that pride destroys, but humility sustains. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, did not preserve wisdom merely as memory. He preserved it as a choice. Civilizations rise and fall, but humanity is never without agency. The warnings are clear, the symbols endure, and the silence waits patiently. What remains is the decision, whether to listen or to ignore. The choice is not between progress and stagnation. Progress is inevitable, but wisdom must guide it. The true choice is between pride and humility, between noise and silence, between domination and balance. Civilizations collapse when pride blinds, when silence is dismissed, and when knowledge outpaces wisdom. They endure when humility sustains, when silence preserves, and when wisdom guides. Thoth left humanity with fragments of truth, spirals to remind us of cycles, circles to preserve balance, stars to whisper humility, and myths to disguise cosmic law. These were not relics of superstition, but carriers of memory. They endure so that humanity can choose to remember. The choice left to humanity is simple, yet profound: to repeat the pattern of collapse, or to break it, to ignore the warnings, or to honor them, to drown wisdom in noise, or to preserve it in silence. Collapse is not inevitable. It is consequence. Balance is not impossible. It is choice. Modern civilization stands at this threshold. Towers rise higher than pyramids. Machines multiply faster than chariots, and networks spread knowledge faster than scribes could dream. Yet wisdom diminishes, silence is lost, and pride grows louder. The signs of another fall whisper across the horizon. The choice remains: will humanity listen? And so, the choice left to humanity is timeless. It is the same choice faced by the first civilization, by Egypt, by Rome, and by all who believed themselves eternal. Thoth ensured that even when history begins too late, the lesson would endure. Civilizations rise and fall, but humanity always has a choice. Pride destroys, silence preserves, and humility sustains. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that collapse is not inevitable, it is consequence. Civilizations fall when pride blinds wisdom, when silence is lost, and when progress outpaces humility. Yet before civilization falls again, humanity is always given a chance to listen, to remember, and to choose differently. The first civilization ignored the warnings. It built temples for vanity, turned rituals into spectacle, and twisted sound into control. Collapse followed, quietly, step by step, until floods and fires erased its monuments. Egypt, Greece, Rome, and countless others repeated the pattern, each believing itself eternal, each dismissing silence, each falling when pride consumed balance. But Thoth preserved fragments of wisdom so that humanity would never be without guidance. Spirals remind us of cycles, circles of balance, and stars of humility. The emerald tablets whisper that knowledge without wisdom is noise, progress without balance is vanity, and pride destroys civilizations. These are not relics of superstition, but warnings disguised as memory. Before civilization falls again, humanity must remember that silence is sacred. It must honor humility, preserve balance, and guard wisdom against pride. Collapse does not arrive suddenly, but quietly, step by step, until arrogance blinds and silence is forgotten. Yet silence also preserves. It waits patiently, carrying wisdom across ages, ready to be rediscovered. Modern civilization stands at this threshold. Towers rise higher than pyramids. Machines multiply faster than chariots, and networks spread knowledge faster than scribes could dream. Yet wisdom diminishes, silence is mocked, and pride grows louder. The signs whisper across the horizon, but the choice remains. Will humanity listen before collapse returns? And so, before civilization falls again, Thoth's lesson endures. Civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom waits patiently in silence. The choice is timeless. Pride destroys, silence preserves, and humility sustains. Humanity must decide whether to repeat the pattern or to break it before the rhythm of collapse begins once more. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom endures. He did not preserve monuments, nor the names of kings, nor the noise of empires. What he left behind was a final message, a whisper across ages, a truth disguised in silence, waiting for those who would listen. The final message was simple: humility sustains, silence preserves, and pride destroys. Knowledge without wisdom becomes noise. Progress without balance becomes vanity. And civilizations collapse when they forget these truths. Thoth's message was not meant to frighten, but to remind. Collapse is not punishment, but consequence. Renewal is always possible, but only if humanity chooses humility over pride, silence over noise, and balance over domination. He encoded this message in spirals, circles, stars, and myths. He disguised it in rituals, preserved it in silence, and carried it through symbols that survived floods and fires. The emerald tablets whispered it, temples aligned with stars reflected it, and myths retold it. The message was never lost, only ignored. And so, the final message that remains is timeless. Civilizations rise and fall, but wisdom waits patiently in silence. Humanity always has a choice: to repeat the pattern of collapse or to break it. The message endures, not in monuments or armies, but in silence, humility, and balance. The story drifts now, like a lullaby carried on the wind. The warnings have been spoken, the lessons preserved, and the silence waits patiently. Imagine the stars above, whispering the same truths Thoth once guarded. The spirals turn, the circles close, and the rhythm of time breathes softly. Civilizations may rise, civilizations may fall, but wisdom endures, hidden in silence, waiting for seekers. And as the night deepens, the story folds itself into stillness, like a book closing gently. Good night.